G'day beautiful people. This video is all about genes, genetics, and I'm going to relate it to how I healed myself, how the body heals, how mind over matter and the placebo effect actually work. This is quite obvious for me because it's my reality. It's actually been my life. And when you experience something, it moves from concept or interesting reading or something you saw on social media to experience, knowing. And that experience it's 4K, it's full high def. It enriches the brain, and when you've lived it, no one can take it away from you. Now, I innately healed myself back in 2007 after critical injuries, shattering my back, broke my back in 6 places, L1, L2, L3, critical head injuries, critical brain hemorrhaging, and had to have my face peeled off, cut off, and fully rebuilt, 44 bits of titanium. It was bleak prognosis. I was told I'd be permanently disabled. And innately, I stepped into the frequency. Okay, I'm talking about frequency. I mean the emotion, the energy of love and gratitude. Like when I came out of my coma, after a week in a coma, it was like I was plugged in to an electrical source. Like this frequency was just emanating through every single cell in my body. I couldn't even turn it off. And I married that with mental rehearsal. I just kept visualizing, like at night time when I was by myself, I couldn't sleep, I was 42 kilos. I kept visualizing a future where I was me now, where I was strong and healed and healthy and far, far away from that hospital bed. Now, I was lucky enough to spend some time with Dr. Joe Dispenza a few years back, and look, when I read his book, You Are the Placebo, it was just like he was just saying exactly what I had done innately 7 years earlier. Like he was just talking about the science behind what I instinctively did when I was in hospital. And I've spent a lot of the last 6 or 7 years, especially studying epigenetics. And the reason is, obviously, people talk a lot about genes. People always say it's genetic. It's genetic, or this is genetic, that's genetic. But what are genes? What do they do? And what's the new science of epigenetics? Well, genes are a blueprint. That's it. Your genes are code. They code for proteins. The moving shape of proteins is the expression of life. So proteins are responsible for the structure and the function of your body. The word protein originates from the Greek word protas, which means of primary importance. So we know that genes are coding for proteins, and that proteins are responsible for the structure and the function of your body. So then we start to ask some questions like, how do genes get activated? What's turning genes on, turning them off? Because traditional Darwinian theory, and it's a theory, the central dogma, if you will, that is taught at school is that DNA goes to RNA, goes to protein. Okay, so DNA is self-regulating. That's what the perception is in society. That's what's taught. The DNA has an intelligence of itself and it can just turn itself on. But it's not the truth, because DNA isn't self-actualizing. It's a blueprint. That's what it actually is. And the missing link in this theory of central dogma that's still taught is that its environmental signal goes to DNA, which goes to RNA, which goes to protein. That's the actual flow of information. And when I'm talking about an environmental signal, this can be like the environment of your body, like pollutants out there, energy coming from the sun. But there's our internal environment as well, which is thoughts, choices, actions, beliefs, and emotional states. And what physicists have proven and shown is that energy, frequency, is 100 times more powerful at bringing about epigenetic changes than, for example, a chemical landing on its receptor site. So there's two different ways these epigenetic changes take place. And one is like a lock and a key, where, for example, a neuropeptide lands at the cell and lands in its receptor site. So they're responding to that chemical, physical input. But there's also these little antennae that your cells have on them that are responding to frequency, changes in energy. And that's what emotion is. Energy in motion, emotion. And it's 100 times more powerful. So with epigenetics, we have to start to understand that your actions and your choices and your thoughts, your behaviors, the emotions that you primarily sit in throughout the day are affecting your health. You are playing a part in your own genetic expression, the biggest part actually, because the new science says that 95% of our genetic expression is epigenetically. It's involved with signals coming from the environment. So you can look at identical twins and you test them at birth, but then they tested them again in these studies when they're 40 years old and found that genetically they were no longer identical twins. They had epigenetically thought and chosen, behaved and felt different emotions, had different life experiences, and at 40 these identical twins aren't identical anymore. Just think about that for a second. So when it comes to healing, if we surrender to a diagnosis, if we move into fear because a doctor has said never, then we will epigenetically upregulate genes that we don't want, and epigenetically we can downregulate or switch off the genes that would have allowed us to heal, that would have allowed the body, the intelligence that gives life to the body, to heal the body and return us to balance, return us to expression of life, to homeostasis. It's a very, very tricky thing because we're so conditioned into the God complex when it comes to doctors. And it takes courage to think any thought greater than what, the guy in the white coat has told you. I mean, he's got the PhD or the stethoscope and I'm a dummy and they must know more. It takes a lot of will, a lot of faith, a lot of courage inside yourself to think a thought that's greater than the diagnosis and to hold on to love, to hold on to faith and hope inside yourself that your body can heal. I was only able to do it because I've known since I was a little kid that belief impacts our health. I've just known this since I was like 7, 8 years old. That there's just an intelligence in my body that is healing my body. It's beating my heart. It's growing my fingernails. I figured it out because I used to watch kids at school, and I was guilty to this as well. Someone would sneeze, cough, or a teacher would say so-and-so's sick today, and I'd immediately drive a thought. I'm just a little kid. I'd go, oh no, I think I'm going to get sick. I think I am getting sick. What if I get sick? And I just kept noticing that again and again and again and again. The next morning I'd wake up and my glands would be up and I'd be sick. Now I'll make another video on how that works, what is actually known as psychoneuroimmunology, and how we auto-suggest to ourselves something, and then we were actually able to downregulate the immune system and then have that predicament come to pass, actually get sick. But this is just simple kid logic. I literally could see that someone would say I'm sick, or they'd sneeze or they'd cough near me, and I would go, oh, I hope I don't get sick. And there's a little bit of fear, a little bit of worry, like, oh no. And then every single time I would wake up and I'd be sick. So I guess for me, I've always known that belief impacts biology. And psychoneuroimmunology and epigenetics, the latest biology, the latest neuroscience, tells us that that is the case. Mind over matter is a reality. It's a fact. This is how your physiology, your body is actually functioning throughout the day. Is the mind is constantly impacting it. They had this study in Europe done at a university, and they took these guys that were all healthy, but they didn't work out much, a tiny bit overweight, and they got them to do exercise once to twice on average a week. That's it. They got them to go to spin classes. After a few short weeks, they tested these guys, and they had epigenetically upregulated over 7,000 new genes. Over 7,000 new genes. Let me put that in perspective. Your genome, the human genome, has 23,600 genes. In a few weeks, a third of the human genome. Just think about that for a second. Almost a third of the human genome, by thinking, choosing, acting, behaving in different ways, producing different emotional states. These are called behavioral dependent genes, switched on through having novel experiences. So this is the true science of genes, genetics. So when we say, oh, it's genetic, we've got to realize that, some, far less than 5% of humanity is born with a genetic defect, so it's actually genetic, so hereditary, or that would produce a protein that was then defective, and then we would express a dis-ease. But that's fewer than 5%. The latest science says it's around 2%. But for the vast majority of us, as I said, our lifestyle factors, our thinking, choosing, acting, believing, and emotions are impacting our own health. So this is brilliant. I mean, people get angry at me when I just tell them about this, the years and years and years of research I've done. But hey, man, it means we're not victims. You become a creator. So the best analogy I have for epigenetics, and to make it super simple for people to understand, is because I'm a musician. Your genes are like a storehouse of limitless potential. They're like a guitar in a guitar case. Okay, so if you want to learn guitar, or you want to play a song, obviously you've got to stand up and walk over to that guitar case. Okay, so that's the signal, that's the environmental cue. Okay, that's the thought, the inspiration. I'm gonna learn Tears in Heaven by Eric Clapton, or whatever, some beautiful song. That intention, you stand up, you have to walk across the room. That's analogous to, for example, a neuropeptide being released from your brain because you keep thinking in a certain way. Thinking in the same way, that level of mind releases a neuropeptide that travels down to the cell wall. That's you walking across the room to pick up the guitar. You've actually then got to open the case, right? pick up the guitar and start playing those chords is exactly the same as that neuropeptide docking on the cell wall. It either then creates or changes a protein, travels to the nucleus, and it finds that whatever it was coded for, right? It finds that piece of genetic material, and it has to unwrap. It has to be unwrapped. It's like a banana in a banana peel. Until that environmental signal and that regulatory protein comes and unwraps part of that genetic material so it can be read, it's just latent potential. That's why I said to you, it's limitless potential. Just like a guitar in a guitar case could have any song ever written played, but it can't play itself. It can't play itself. It requires you or me to stand up and walk across the room, open the case, and start playing that song. So when you start to understand that that is a better representation of what your genes are than, these ticking time bombs that are out to get you, and it's self-actualizing, it's self-regulating. Of course we're going to feel like victims. Of course it's going to put us into fear. And this is why I keep saying to people, information is power. The more you learn about the human body, it takes the fear out of it. And fear-based medicine breeds a fear-based mindset. And that fear-based mindset can actually make us sick. So look, that's today's video. I'm so passionate about this stuff because it's my body, it's my life. And I was able to accomplish this healing. I was able to change. I was able to defy all these experts. And then I needed to know the why and the how. I needed to be able to know that I could teach this and understand how the brain and body are functioning. So I hope that's been enlightening for you. Any questions, shoot them down below. If you want to get me for public speaking, podcast, interview, YouTube, whatever, or you're interested in one-on-one coaching or my workshops, my music, my books, head to damienhorton.com. And as always, sending you guys light, sending you love, peace.